You see, at the time, the camcorder required a backpack. You had to like put a camera up and record it to the tape deck on your back, and then you had to put it in. That tape deck was part of the VCR, the video recording device. So it was actually like part of this huge contraption. Within 2 years, it merged into a smaller, more compact device, smaller being big, but it was something that changed everything. Now, that is a big shift in the way that people did things, because now they could participate. And really, that's the birth of participatory culture. The true idea of Steve Jobs that he wanted to have in the Mac, which wasn't available yet for the technology, but the mindset was there. The technology wouldn't appear for Steve Jobs for another decade and a half, but the camcorder itself was really a big intervention to how people produced media. The next thing, which I think you'll find funny and ironic, is that in 1985, Kodak develops the first ever CCD. That's the charged couple device, the digital camera. So, whoops, Kodak went bankrupt because of this. But the idea was that you can take light and turn light into electricity, which is this, but this is a CMOS chip. But CCD would take a charged electricity, turn all the light into value, quantized, and we'll talk about this later, not in this lecture, but a later one, that quantizing information allows it to be distributed. You could put it into a small file size and actually watch it somewhere else. So Kodak invents a chip that would sit, the chip is about this big, it's hard to see how big that is. The chip would basically take through a lens, quantize all of the color into pixels, keep a numerical value of it, and keep the image, and then be able to share that image in a digital file. And they invent that chip. That changes us. That creates this cyber utopia that really gets born then. Now, at the exact same time, one of the biggest changes in our culture appear with the advent of a brand new word. 2 new words come out in the mid-1980s, 1984 and 1985. One of the words is from William Gibson's Neuromancer when he uses the terminology cyberspace. The first time it's ever heard is 1985 in this book. And what he was doing was taking the idea of Ivan Sutherland and Lars Fuchs and all these people who really wanted to have an intervention with the way computers worked, and wanted a space that didn't exist in our physical space, but existed in a digital space, a cyberspace, a space different from anything we could touch, something that connects directly to our brain. Now, this is something to keep in mind later when we talk about machine thinking and AI. That the way the mind works is really on electrical signals. So we aren't far off from the thought that the mind itself as an electrical signal is just a large, mega-sized computer. What cyberspace does is take that to the next degree, which is that it could potentially be a simulation, that you could be inside of a machine, that your mind would not know the difference if you could envelope it completely. We'll come back to this, trust me. The other word that you should know is virtual reality. The word was invented at this time. Before this, it was known as head-mounted display, which is a huge box that you put on your head and look at 2 little cameras. This guy, Jaron Lanier, created a lab near Silicon Valley and created a language for virtual reality known as VPL, Virtual Production Language, or something along those lines. It'll be correct right here. And that language is a way of interacting with 3-dimensional spaces that you could be inside of while wearing it on your face. So we get more of an interactive view, a binocular view. They created a glove for it. There was a headset and even a full electrical bodysuit, so you could really feel what was going on. But that virtual reality, which we now see today and you'll learn more about in a later lecture, was really introduced in the mid-1980s as this new device. Now, spoiler alert, Jaron Lanier today is a bit of a Luddite. In fact, he most recently wrote a book called You Are Not a Gadget, in which he tells people, get away from all this. We'll have to dissect that later in another lecture. Lastly, I want to sum up with 2 big things that I think is very important to the end of this little lecture, this very short 1980s lecture. 2 things happened in 1989 that apply very much to the culture of today. 1, IRC, Internet Relay Chat, goes from modem to modem typing to a company called America Online, which is founded in 1989. And America Online basically decides that IRC would be a way of communicating with one another, that we would be able to connect via these text boxes, and we'd be able to connect in these spaces that aren't part of a batch system or a machine system or a network system like the DARPA unit. So that year in 1989, as you saw in the last video, DARPA dismantles the box units and creates the modem-based internet, the internet that we know today. And they actually network all the computers into something known as the World Wide Web, which is a series of nodes that are out there that you could access through web URLs or through IRC numbers, IP addresses, Internet Protocol addresses that allow you to directly dial and connect via networks. Rather than these big box servers, they connect via the larger systems at large. So that's a huge shift, and we'll get to that in the 90s. But the World Wide Web is launched at the same time as AOL is basically being built. We'll get to how the World Wide Web operates in the next lecture. And the last thing you should know is that 1989, something to end with here, also launches the very first episode of America's Funniest Videos, which is really the beginning of the viral video. The very first stages of how we understand virality come from Bob Saget hosting America's Funniest Videos. So I'll leave you with that, and until next time, have fun.